It's 5 o'clock in London. It's midday in New York, midnight in Hong Kong, 2 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 9:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young, the IPO-VID live stream, Series 31, episode number 2. That is in the aggregate. IPO-VID episode 182. And more importantly, it's our last of the season before the summer break starts here. Exciting news from Miami Exchanges Group. Their IPO is coming soon. They filed for the long-expected IPO, raising $100 million on NYSE as the target. And the big question is, of course, will it break the $3 billion market cap level? Big ambition, meanwhile, from SIX Swiss Exchange, having completed the acquisition of Aquis. They are looking to have 20% market share across European equities. Don't forget to check out our IPO vid there with Bjorn Sibern, the boss of SIX Exchange, who joined us a year ago, and indeed, 2.5, 3 years ago, he joined us when he was still working for NASDAQ. Specifically in the EU, ladies and gentlemen, EuroCTP, the exchange consolidated tape bidder, now has members in every one of the EU's 27 jurisdictions, and 24-hour trading is in vogue. LSEG fancy it to spread their equity liquidity, while CMA wants to go 7 days a week, all day and all night. We're not going to be going all day and all night today, ladies and gentlemen, but we are going to be going for the next hour. We're chatting with a returning guest, the wonderful Steve Zwick. The topic is Digitising Carbon. Steve's a former futures broker trader. You've seen him a number of times on IPO-VID. He writes about the economics of sustainable development and the interplay between land use and climate change, subjects he developed a fascination for in a 30-year career that brought him from Chicago's trading pits and led to subsistence farms in rural parts of Kenya, Vietnam, and Brazil. As a multimedia journalist, Steve has worked across the world from the Chicago Reader, Fortune, and Times magazines to Germany's Deutsche Welle radio, and now produces the Bionic Planet podcast, which is a vital listen for anybody who's interested in carbon finance. So, Steve, greetings. Where in the world are you today? Welcome back.
I'm in Chicago, Illinois, right down on the lake.
Excellent. And presumably on a hot summer's day, looking forward to a degree of lake time later on, I hope.
Absolutely. The minute we're done, I'm running out and jumping in the water.
Sounds like a great idea. So look, I mean, here we are talking about carbon. Let's start with the elephant in the room. I mean, why did we reach this point where digitization got such a bad name in carbon markets? And, well, this time it's different, apparently. How is this wave different?
Yeah, it's a lot different. I think that digitization got a bad name in the carbon markets, mostly because of what happened in 2001, 2002. We had a whole bunch of, the crypto dudes and, just kind of parachuting in with tokenization, trying to tokenize carbon credits, which added zero value at all, completely disrupted the market. And actually, they were all talking about how we're going to make it transparent, but what they were really doing was making it more opaque. They were taking a system that's already transparent but has been called opaque in the media, turning it into opaque, and then claiming credit for bringing transparency. And at the same time, you had just regular tech bros and crypto chicks parachuting in with technology solutions to problems that didn't exist. There was a whole flurry there where every new tech startup coming into the space seemed to have an image of some little prong sticking into the mud, saying this is going to revolutionize everything, and in reality, none of it revolutionized anything. So you had and it diverted massive amounts of money. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars went into tech companies that extracted value from the markets and created huge distractions. So there was a really serious backlash against these tech guys coming in, thinking that they were, the attitude was, we have big technology brains, you have little farmer brains, and we're going to set you all straight.
I love that. You got little farmer brains. We're going to set you all straight. That's a fantastic line altogether. So cool. So therefore, how have things changed over time? The crypto bros have been sent packing, or they've moved on to something else, or has the empire struck back, as it were, and the establishment come up with a better solution?
That's a really interesting question. And what's happened is multiple things. First of all, there was always a move towards technological innovation in these markets. There was always a move towards remote sensing. There's a company called C-Trees, for example, headed up by former scientists from NASA who have always been at the cutting edge of remote sensing and trying to estimate deforestation risk. And they've always been saying for decades, you know, the technology's not there yet. We still get better. You still get better data from ground truth and going out measuring trees. That technology has been evolving slowly, and at the same time, the process of digitizing the methodologies has been moving ahead slowly, and that's just a very cumbersome, complex process because carbon methodologies are very complex. They're complex tools. They're not as simple as people think they are. So these works had always been going on. There've been, I mean, Vera and Gold Standard have both been working to digitize their methodologies since at least 2020, probably before. But that process was just taking a long time. So, and then what happened since then is that some of the, I'll say some of the crypto guys and some of the tech bros, they went legit. They basically turned and started to look at what's happening in at where are the gaps, where are the technology needs, and how can we address them? And rather than saying we want to come in and rule the world, they were like, how can we support this system? And so you had and then you also had an influx of people from ag tech, which was kind of an interesting development. These are people who, you know, they work in agricultural technology, so it's very analogous to carbon. So they've been through this already and something that's similar. And then the third development is you have some of the people who I derided as tech bros and crypto chicks, they actually did adapt and become real leaders. So there's a group called Hedera Foundation, which started as a blockchain organization and still largely is, but they've become real leaders in this space and really filling the gap in terms of, you know, where can digitization provide value and where is it just a toy?
Fascinating. We're already gripping this subject here. Thank you very much to the person who's already sent us a like. Do please send us a little bit of love, ladies and gentlemen. It helps those AI algorithms get us further up the rankings, and we can discuss these fascinating topics with our guest today, Steve Zwick, as we're talking about digitizing carbon. So, I mean, I think in part you've answered the question, but I mean, what would you say to the sort of carbon veterans who feel burned by those past promises of tokenization of and automation, Steve?
I understand why they are. I mean, I was critical of a lot of these guys myself, and I think it's just I think they just have to look at who's embracing it. I mean, this is I don't want to mention all the names right now because this is for an article. If I have to plug, I hope you don't mind. It's for an
Go ahead.
article that's going to appear in Quantum Commodity Intelligence. That's QC Intel, and the article has not yet come out. So I don't want to scoop myself by giving away all the details, but a lot of real and if you're not a subscriber, you can get a trial subscription for 2 weeks at no cost. I think you might find it's worthwhile. It's qcintel.com. And to answer your question now, a lot of real pioneers in this space, people who developed some of the earliest carbon projects, people who really were true innovators in this space back when we were inventing this on the fly, those people have pivoted over to the technology because I think, you know, if you have a problem-solving mind by nature, you see the gaps in the technology. You see, I mean, I've been working on this now for 20 years, and anybody who's ever done a carbon project, especially in land use, it's all about data. It's data and data and data, and it's all variable. And it's how do you track this in a you know, in a carbon project where you could have different data points depending on which variables you enter? How do you do it in a way that's truthful and that's honest and that's adaptable? And also there's a lot of tedium. So the real early adapters, the early movers, you know, people I can mention, Vasco van Roosmalen is one. People who really were pushing the envelope on this stuff in 2005 are at the forefront of this latest embrace. And we're seeing a lot of industry vets who do embrace the technology. What they're finding is it now reduces the tedium. One of the people I spoke to told me that she's a carbon expert, she's a forestry expert, and she hates the fact that she spends 80% of her time on this tedious data entry stuff that no one else can do, because you have to understand the material in order to do the tedious data entry. But with new digitized methodologies, she can spend 80% of her time out in the field, sitting under the acacia trees, visiting the people in the villages. And that's really why we get into this space. Nobody gets into this space to sit behind a computer entering stuff into spreadsheets and then having to go back and manually correct it all. So that I think is the fact that the people who built this business are now moving into and have already, they've been experimenting with it for a while, but they're now at the cutting edge of this.
That's very interesting. We've got a great question coming up. I'm going to come to in a moment. But actually, I'm going to define a couple of terms before we come to that excellent question on LinkedIn, because I would like you to come up with, there's one thing actually, an acronym you're probably going to use in the answer to the next question after this, which is a PDD. Just explain to us what a PDD is in the overall process.
Okay, PDD stands for Project Design Document. And when you develop a project, you have to you have to go through multiple phases. The first phase is validation, where you come up with a project design, you write it up, and it goes through independent auditors. And what you write up is the PDD, the Project Design Document. But it's a months long process. And one of the sources in my piece had said, his name was Raphael Duray, and he actually said it best when he said every PDD is a mini PhD. It's in theory, you're following a sequence of events. A methodology is like a recipe book, and you're following the sequence. But in reality, the carbon methodologies are not sequential. That's what makes them so difficult to digitize, because they're holistic. You change one thing, and then everything you did before has to change. It's like writing a novel more than anything, and trying to align all of this is really complicated. But a project design document is a detailed, usually a 300-page document that shows you, and it's usually in a PDF format, or has been until now, and it has all of your arguments in favor of developing the project and why you think the design is valid, and then in all of your assumptions and everything and how they align with the standard. Then it goes to a validation and verification body. They then go through this. And again, going to Duray in my article, I think he said it best. It's like a giant spaghetti bowl, and validation, you have to straighten out each piece of spaghetti and look at it individually, and then see how they all fit back together. It's really a tedious, complicated process, and it takes forever. And usually, you have to then go back and ask, well, why did you choose this number? Because you have multiple decision points along the way where you can say, I'm going to pick this variable, I'm going to pick this one, and you justify it. The VVB may say, well, why did you choose this instead of that? Then you've got to justify it, and then you've got to give them the data that aligns with that, because they don't have it in front of them. It's all in files and annexes. So it's a long, ridiculous, tedious process. And it's why validation can take months or even years. I talked to somebody the other day who's also in the article, told me that he's got a project that's been in validation now for 2 years, just because there's so much data to go through, and it's killing him. But if you, with a digitized process, all of the data is available, within the digital PDD. So you can go through, and if a validation body says, well, I don't know, I don't think this number doesn't look right to me, let's see what the choices were, they can see what other data you gathered, and that'll just make the whole process smoother.
So therefore, we can see, obviously, I mean, there's a lot more to life than taking a PDD and just turning it into a PDF in order to be digitizing carbon, as is the topic of today's show with Steve Zwick. Teo B, your question is fantastic. I just want to set the scene a little bit more, and then we're going to get stuck into that. Because therefore, I mean, Steve, can you walk us through what a fully digitized carbon project looks like, from the design to the validation to the issuance?
Yeah, there's so far only one project has got no fully digitized project has yet issued credits. So and the bottleneck has always been validation, and you may recall we've talked about this before on this show, how difficult that process is. Yeah, and so there is a project in Senegal which was created by Alcott. It's called Alcott is a project developer that was just purchased by a company called Carbon X, and the project is called the Alcott Blue Carbon Project. And blue carbon we've talked about blue carbon on the show.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. And blue carbon is also, it's inherently complex, because you're gathering data related to seagrass and everything else, and lots of things that impact it. So that that blue carbon project has finally entered validation digitally. And what's happened is now in the early phase, they start the way they always do. You still have to gather all this data manually. You still have to do these surveys, and which are, I mean, I'm involved in a project right now, and it's just doing the surveys, asking the questions, double checking, triple checking, quadruple checking. There's still no substitute for that. That can't be done digitally. But all of the relevant data is put into into the digitized methodology, and then as they never generate a physical PDD, it moves into the Vera system, and now and even as it's being developed, as the PDD is being developed, it's being done in real time. It's being done in forms online, so that the project developer, every step of the way, he can see, his steps are being uploaded in real time. The validation and verification body can actually see in real time what they're entering. The system prevents them from entering something that doesn't quite fit, just like you would when you're doing your taxes. It'll reject something that is an obvious error. And now, as it goes through the validation process, what's happening is they're able to, as the auditors go through, any number that they think might not be the optimum number, they can go through and they can click down and they can see all the source data. They can work all that themselves, and then they'll get to the point where they're going to have questions. They're still going to have to call back and say, okay, we still have an issue here, we have an issue there. But then by completing this digitally, then the whole system, the project goes into verification. Verification is the next step, where another auditor comes in and says, okay, first auditor says your design is good, that's fantastic. The next one says you're actually doing what you say you're going to do. But because that first step is digitized, now you've got eyes on everything. You've got satellite, you've got all this, digitally collected data, that now the verification process can go really quickly. Verification has also been a tedious process, because usually people have to go and revisit the site and go out and physically look to see what's happening. You still need a little bit of that, but the cost of verifying is high, and the cost of issuance is high. Under the new methodology, after it goes through the process, you can see in real time where every penny goes. You can see what actions are being taken, and if a project wants to issue credits, they can issue them quarterly if they want. In theory, they could even do it hourly eventually, but I don't know if that's really going to be the way people go. Though it might in some, because that's the other thing is, I'm talking to developers. They're like, this opens up a whole new type of projects. If I can I digress into that for a second?
Go for it. Yeah, why not?
Because there's one that I mentioned, and I mentioned a guy named Vasco van Roosmalen, and he has a company called Reseed, and he helped develop VM15, one of the very first avoided deforestation methodologies. He's now worked on a methodology that looks at the vulnerability of smallholders. And because what you find with smallholder farmers is, if they're doing something that's a sustainable practice, there are certain incidents that tip them over. Maybe prices go too low and they have no choice but to chop the trees on their land. Maybe
Right.
prices go too high, they get squeezed out by somebody who comes in who's maybe a more predatory developer. You can track all of these cases, and now what you can see in real time is, this farmer is vulnerable based on all the data that we know. This is when we should give them some financial help to prevent them from having to sell their land or chop their trees. So this is a real-time system that is it could not have been developed without digitization, because it requires all kinds of real-time monitoring. And it's designed for use with insetting, which is, it's not going to be generating carbon credits that go out, companies buy them on the open market. It's designed for companies that are maybe buying from this region, in the cocoa sector or something, and now they get a signal. They can now see, hey, these farmers are under threat. We can move in, we can support them, and we can, in our carbon inventory, we can register this. We don't have a carbon claim. There's no credit that goes on the market, but we're able to verify with pretty high certainty that we just prevented a massive disruption. And this would not have been possible without digitization. So that's kind of the next thing that people are talking about. Is, I think a lot of the resistance that came in was the way these projects are developed, the way they existed. Technology couldn't have made them move more quickly. But now, with this new real-time these real-time approaches, we're able to move into new kinds of interventions that just wouldn't have been possible before.
So that's brilliant. So you're talking about something like reseed, and they're basically helping reduce the total time to market, which is obviously vitally important. And as you say, I mean, a huge amount of the problem, we've been talking about it before, as you say, we talked about blue carbon, we talked about all forms of different carbon markets previously, was the sheer time getting to market. I'm going to introduce the fabulous question from TOB at this point in time. Thank you very much, Teo, for your question. What are the levers to accelerate methodology and project development scaling with the 7-year process? We won't have enough to trade this fast, he asserts.
Mm-hmm. If I understand correctly, I guess there's the levers, meaning on the demand side, or just the levers that will make it move more quickly?
I think probably he's talking about the levers to accelerate the actual ability to get to market, to get projects to market.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one for that, because especially with the 7-year process, because most projects have like a 7-year, reporting period.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest one is going to be the ability to have digital validation. I mean, that is the big bottleneck, and it's also project design. Like this is kind of an interesting thing that comes out in the article, which I do encourage people to read at Quantum Commodity Intelligence. But the thing is,
I'll just interrupt you there. Methodology development. Thank you very much, Teo, for just clarifying that. So he's talking about methodology. Yep.
Yeah, in methodology development, it's also kind of an interesting one, because the static methodologies weren't designed with digitization in mind. So what's happening, this is why there's 2 different approaches to digitization. This is actually an important point. There's one where you've got really 3. One is like what reseed primarily does, which is they're developing methodologies as digital methodologies, full stop. The second is taking a methodology that's been developed in the old-fashioned way, and then digitizing it. And within that, there's 2 different ways of doing it. One way is to take PDDs, and usually you have to have a lot of them to do this. But you take a methodology where there's been like 20 PDDs, you can use the existing PDDs and then use AI to train the process so that you're creating a digitized process for creating a digital, for digitally creating a PDD that still gets printed out and sent in. And reseed is doing a little bit of that with existing methodologies. What Hedera does with existing methodologies is a little bit different, is that they go through and they work with the standard to digitize existing methodologies, and then the standard is able to work with them to see how they can adapt the methodology so that the digitized process now is reflected in the methodology, so that the methodology can now recognize things that weren't possible before. So it's an iterative process, where digitization actually changes the methodologies themselves. But that's the big one. And then, and also in the creation of methodologies, because of the availability of data, if you look at, again, what reseed has done, I don't want to just keep harping on reseed, but they're the ones in my head right now. But they, this example that I gave is a good one. They were able to say, look, we've got this methodology that it uses IPCC generated vulnerability indexes to identify short-term threats to farmers, and we can create a carbon offset project based on this, and we would never been able to do it before. And they did it under the social carbon standard. They didn't do it under Vera, but I think they're trying to get it approved under the other standards as well. But that would not have been possible even 2 years ago. Does that answer the question, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Teo, come back to us if you'd like to hear more. It's a great question. It's a great debate, actually. You really opened up the discussion. Thank you very much, Teo B. And so I suppose the one thing I would say is we've all been talking about validation is this huge, big bottleneck in the carbon market. And ultimately, therefore, I think we understand how digitization helps untangle that. But I suppose one question then that arises is, well, does that mean that digitized methodologies are going to put all these consultants out of work? Or does it make their skills better honed, more valuable? How does that work out?
This is something we touch on a lot in the piece, and I think it comes back to the quote that I opened with about I spend 80% of my time doing something tedious, and 20% doing the fun stuff that I studied this for. No, it basically, there is a huge bottleneck right now because there is a shortage of people who really understand the methodologies deeply enough to really do a PDD. I'm helping on a project right now, and realizing how difficult it is to do this if you haven't spent years immersed in it. And because I'm trying to teach people how they can do it themselves, and realizing the learning curve is really steep. Some of the people in the article that I'm doing, I found people who have backgrounds in forest ecology, who are scientists, real scientists who understand this far better than most of the people who are doing the consulting on project development do, but they've never done a project. Now, because they're working with Reseed on the digitized methodology, they didn't have the steep learning curve, but they did have Vasco there to help backstop them. So what's happening is that people who have the expertise, and I'm even seeing it in the project I'm working on, you can digitize only so much. You're always going to get to a point where you're going to hit something that people haven't seen before. So what will happen is the rates that people charge will go down per project, but they'll be able to do more projects. So if the small community of people who understand how to do a methodology, if this small community can suddenly quadruple the number of projects they work on by focusing only on the non-tedious stuff, then it frees up all these other people who have the more universally applicable skills to come in and accelerate it and to meet the demand. So I'd argue, and it's not just me. You'll see it in the piece. Pretty much everybody I talk to who's working with this argues that it levels the playing field. Right now, I'm working on supporting a project in Kenya. I can't really name it yet, but I've got everybody involved in it is a Kenyan national who they understand what's happening on the ground a lot better than I do, and I have this weird little specialized knowledge that I'm able to bring in. But after they do this once with a digitized methodology, they'll be able to do it themselves. They'll be able to replicate it, whereas previously it would have taken forever. It would have taken a long time to be able to do that. So the answer, no, it should, because the demand is going to be so high for this stuff. It's just the need is there. We need to translate the need into demand, but we need to scale, and we need to scale fast. And I think this is going to help us do that.
So that's a fascinating point about the whole scaling thing. I mean, that's incredible. The idea that essentially the best consultants are going to be still employed, and they're going to be able to do 4 times as many projects. They can drop their rate per project quite rapidly if they're saving a lot of time. But therefore, also, I mean, how's that digitization changing those who participate in carbon markets? I mean, is it going to be better for localized or first-time developers, for example?
Yes, I mean, I think that's clear already if you look at the example of Reseed, because they're able to hire people who've never worked in carbon before. I'm working with people in Kenya who have never worked on carbon before, and it will. I mean, I can't say nothing's ever 100%, but I can't see how it would have any other impact, because it is, the weird little specializations that are required are slowing everything down, and people don't understand them. And you've got so many people out there who have advanced degrees in forestry. You've got so many people who know how to work with smallholder farmers. You've got so many people who know how to install a cook stove, and they're all sitting around waiting for the guy who has this little weird body of knowledge to come in and do this tedious stuff for them. So this will free them up. And I'll tell you, the digitized methodologies, I mean, I hate to jump around, but I just want to tell you how when I first had the aha moment. I mentioned Hedera, and I was sitting with a guy named Wes Giesenberger, who is he works with the Hedera Foundation, and he's leading a lot of the digitization efforts. And he sat next to me, and he was showing me how they digitized VMR 006, which was a methodology for clean cook stoves. And the most tedious thing about developing a project is you're going through, and at every step in the process. It's like now you have to choose the right tool, the appropriate tool to use in this situation. Usually then you have to go and look up a bunch of other tools. You have to read them. It's always, no matter how many projects you've done, it's always something you've never really encountered before. You've got to solve a problem within a problem within a problem. And the methodology did it instantly. It didn't solve the problem. It gave you all of your options. It made the decision tree infinitely easier. And every time someone solves a problem in the methodology, because it's publicly available, it becomes known to everybody who comes after you. So every problem you solve, other people can now benefit from what you've done. And this is just going to make it so much easier for people who've never done it before. Again, you'll still probably need someone who's been through the process a bit to backstop you, but it's a game changer.
Fascinating. We've got an epic question actually is coming as we're discussing Digitizing Carbon with Steve Zwick. I'm going to blot out the screen here. Alex Ulliman. Hello, Alex. Thank you for your question. How useful would it be for the digitization efforts to have a shared machine-readable ontology of mitigation projects? Shared ontology development has been of great benefit to, for example, the life scientists, but the standards bodies in carbon might still be too fragmented to open to such an effort. Steve, there's an epic question.
Yeah, I've got a stupid question. I don't even know what ontology is.
Patrick, I think ontology is simply a very, very big word for the overall shared knowledge. I think
okay.
That's ontology, isn't it?
Okay. I hope so, because that's what I thought it meant, and I would say I think it's, this is actually kind of relates to what I just said about the the way the how with Hedera, with their digitized processes, how every problem you solve becomes known to everybody else, and there is convergence around that. I think the standards are ideally we would all converge if we're all trying to solve the same problem, and I think with the advent of the ICVCM, that's really what we're aiming for. So I guess I can answer that off the top of my head. I haven't sat down and given it much thought, and again, feel free to correct me if I'm missing the point or if people want to disagree. But to me, the fact that this makes everything so much more, it's already transparent. I hate to say makes it more transparent. It's just making it so much more accessible. We're going to be able to see in real time what works and what doesn't. This is a big thing that, these are evolving approaches, and I think the critiques of carbon credits have made it sound like evolution is some kind of deep, dark, nefarious thing, when in actual fact it's all a learn by doing exercise. And with these new methodologies, one of the advantages is that lessons can be learned in real time. If something isn't effective, we'll be able to see that much more quickly. Whereas previously, you had to wait when like I remember when Vera, when they realized, like in 2019, that not all the VVBs were doing as good a job as they should have in some of the forestry projects, and they started a process of updating that and changing it, and then they implemented a set of secondary reviews, which became really tedious and also slowed this whole thing down. People ask, why does validation take so long? It's because you've got reviewers at VVBs, and Vera came in with their own reviewers, slowed everything down. Then you had a few media groups who came in and thought the whole thing, didn't really give anybody credit for what they were doing, and kind of tried to blow it all up, in my view. And this with digitization, that whole process is going to become much more transparent, so we can make adjustments. There have been times where it became clear that something wasn't working, because of the nature of the way standards work, you had to go through iterative rounds of expert review and public consultation to get it done. This should accelerate that. But then the standard setting bodies have to change their approach. And this is another interesting thing, is the creation of the ICVCM, which is a body that sits over all the standards, and they come up with principles that should apply to all of them. And so if for some reason Vera is too slow, another standard can try to do the same thing. And if they meet the criteria, the ICVCM, and they can find a way to update more rapidly, that will impact everybody. But I guess my final comment on that is, I think the standard setting bodies have been wanting to be more transparent and more iterative, but they've just not been able to. It's just the process of public. The process is just hard, and I think this will simplify that.
Hashtag it's complicated, says Steve. Yes,
Yeah.
ultimately to get there, it's quite tricky.
If I say anything that doesn't make sense, let me know. Okay, go ahead.
No, I think that's a great answer. But Alex Ulliman, thank you very much. If you'd like to add something to it, by all means, ask us as we're discussing digitizing carbon with Steve Zwick here. Here's an easier question coming from our commodities doyen, Anne Berg, also in Chicago. So she's looking to a breakdown so she can understand not the secret sauce of what you're doing, but in layman terms, can you describe the components of the project in Kenya that you're working on, or a similar project?
I can talk about it. Yeah, it's the one that I'm working on is it's a cook stove project, and it's one of the leading. I can probably say, I can give a little bit away. The Anglican school system in Kenya has decided they want to completely digitize their education system. They want to create a digitized curriculum that sits on top of the in-school stuff, so that homework can be done in a digitized way with instant feedback and stuff. It's a really innovative program they've initiated, but they don't have the technology to do it. So they were looking for a way to try to finance this, and at the same time, they've got 4,500 schools that use wood-burning stoves to feed their kids, and they wanted to switch over to clean cooking. Kenya's electric grid is now advanced enough that you could put most of those stoves onto electric cooking. So it's a clean cook stoves project that goes from wood burning to electric. And the reason we're using the new methodology VM50, and we're hoping to become the ones to pilot the digitization of that methodology. I don't know that it's going to happen yet, but I've asked Vera if we could be the ones that do that. But the thing about it is the data gathering and everything, you have to first go in and quantify the amount of wood that's being used. You have to convert that over to emissions, and then you have to calculate, if you switch over to electricity, what's the reduction. In Kenya, it's dramatic because something like 90% of the electricity comes from hydro and wind and solar. So you'll have a dramatic reduction, and with digitization, the first part, the data gathering, is still going to be tedious and ridiculous. You've got to visit all the schools, you've got to do all these tests, you've got to do all these surveys. It's going to be a real nuisance. And then also, but then once they become, but then the process of calculating all of that will be digitized, and if we're able to get into this pilot program, and then once it's digitized, all the stoves will have meters on them, because the way it is now with household stoves is they have to keep a diary. Every household has to have a diary, and you've got to track all this, and there's always human error and mistakes get made, and a lot of doubt can creep in. But with the new digital methodology, there'll be no doubt after the fact. There will still be, we still will have to do a lot of work in measuring the amount of wood that's being burned now, and then we also have to measure what's called FNRB, because you have to make sure that a certain amount of wood that comes in will be renewed. Like if you're buying it from a woodlot and they have a regrowing program, you may turn out that 80% of the wood is renewed each year because they keep planting new trees. And if that's the case, you don't say we reduced it by all of the wood we burned. We've only reduced it by the 30% or whatever that is non-renewable. So that will also be using digital tracking can verify the FNRB. We can verify the usage, and the biggest thing is we can do the calculations, because every step every step in the process, you have to decide which calculation you're going to use and how you're going to apply it. And that will be a lot easier with the digitized methodology. And then again, this is the first time, this is a new digitization of an existing methodology. So we will be the guinea pig if we're selected. If we're not selected, then we'll have to do it the old-fashioned way. But I think that's the gist of the project.
That's really interesting. So that's the project you're looking at in Kenya. Thank you very much, Anne Berg, for that great question. Really interesting here, talking about digitizing carbon with Steve Zwick. We've got about 20 minutes to run here, and it's very, very interesting, because I suppose one of the things we have to then think about is, what are the limits to what you expect that you can get out of the digitization process, or have you already discovered bottlenecks that we simply can't expect it to solve?
You know, yeah, that's a really good question, and we talk about that all the time. You know, it's like an example. What I'm doing right now, this data gathering for these particular wood burning stoves, there's no substitute for going out, visiting these schools independently, following them for a couple of weeks, because you got to make sure, you know, you're not altering their behavior by observing them. You know, that kind of tedious stuff is always going to have to be done manually. And then also what we call stakeholder engagement, or in in land use we call it FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, because you know, these projects are people projects. You're changing human behavior, and if you're going into another project I spent a lot of time on recently in Kenya was in the Northern Rangelands Trust. These Maasai herders and Samburu herders, different tribal herders who have different approaches to dealing with their cattle, and you know, you have to talk to them to find out how they do things now, why they do what they do, and then showing them what changes they can make, how it impacts their own livelihood, how it impacts the climate, which in turn impacts the income they get. There's an education process where you have to explain to people what the opportunity is that you're presenting. There's a listening process where you have to hear from them what they want to do. And then there's also the dividing up of the resources. You know, the benefit sharing is the technical term. You have to sit down, especially in land use. You know, like in this school case, the schools have already decided they want to put the money into digitization. So this came from them. They're like, can you help us find a way where we can digitize our schools and, you know, flip these stoves at the same time? So the money is earmarked for digitization. But in a lot of other cases, the money would be earmarked for training and things like that. But then there's money left over, and you have to work. The community has to tell you, we want. One community might say we want to build a school, another might say we want to build a community center. You've really got to work with them. That just, you know, can't really be digitized. You've got to, you know, that's all people work. But I'd say those are the two main, that's the main thing. Is right now the data gathering is still tedious. Another one is project is defining the project boundary is not yet digitized. That's, you know, when we go in, and this is also super tedious. I've got to look at where the schools are located, see where there's overlap with other projects, approach the other projects, make sure we're not double counting, make sure there's no leakage. If there is leakage, account for it. So there's that process should, in theory, be something we can do digitally once all these. But every project has to be digitized before we can do it. And when we do, then that'll be almost identifying the overlaps will be almost instant. But for now, that's also really, really tedious, and I'm not looking forward to it.
But it's going to give us an incredible amount of data, and that's what's going to be fascinating about that in order to be able to do the comparatives.
Yeah, and the other thing too, the data that comes from these projects has so many other benefits. I mentioned the Suderie Forest Carbon Project, which was the first one I ever worked on, and Vasco van Roosmalen had the lead on that. And what he points out quite often, because of that project, they became the most studied, indigenous tribe in the Amazon. We had to map every inch of that place. We had to, and all where the income came from, where the water came from, where it flowed to, and they became studied by anthropologists and everything. And it put them on the map, which made them. It gave them a degree of immunity from attack from from outsiders, because anything that happened to them got in the news. But it really helped them to understand what other policies they can implement to move themselves forward, and that is what happens on a lot of these projects. Once you the amount of data you have to gather for a carbon project is off the charts. No, people don't realize how much you have to go through, and 90% of it doesn't get used. Because you're really only looking for that little sliver that applies to the emissions. But there's so much that just sits there, and with digitized methodologies, the knock-on benefit of just having this available to people is huge.
Speaking of knock-on benefits, let's give you a rest for a second for some water. We're into the final quarter of the show by the time we come back, Steve. So going to give you a chance to just rest up for a moment. Let's talk about Bitcoin for 1 minute. Here's one of our short videos to discuss a particular risk asset issue. Meanwhile, in Big World, Bitcoin is the future of money. Or is it? This isn't investment advice. In fact, anyway, it might be disinvestment advice. But either way, do your own research. However, one of the things about Bitcoin that perplexes me is this claim it's the future of money. I think that's nonsense, and here's one reason why. Bitcoin behaves like a risk asset, not money. It's wildly inflationary. It's hugely volatile and indeed not overly liquid either. And actually at its core, being limited to 21 million, that means it actually would tend to be disinflationary in another way, but that's a whole topic for another debate. Look at the last month or two of price action. When Trump upended the international tariff system, stocks fell and Bitcoin fell. Now a month or two later, it's back to the great BTC bull market, baby, propelled by the attempts to get the three beautiful bills through on the crypto world. Stocks have recovered, Bitcoin moved in their wake, and it's the ultimate punt. That's not a credible currency. That's a cult-backed pyramid scheme. For more in Big World, like or follow. And that brings us very elegantly to our book of the week this week, which is something entirely different. We're talking about tax schedules the world over, tax arbitrage, the trolling of the international tax system. Quite interesting, given the fact that Nigel Feetham, who was previously a guest on this very show a couple of years ago, when he was running Hassan's financial practice in Gibraltar, is now actually the finance minister of Gibraltar. So well worth a view of that with the perspective of where Nigel has advanced to in the world. Let me just say thank you very, very much to Anne Berg for her question most recently. She's also added a response. Okay, thank you. I can comprehend that, she says. That's great to hear. And I'm glad you're listening to that. Well, actually, I mean, speaking of books of the week, Steve, I just want to change gear for a second. You've got a book coming out in the very near future, and we're going to flash it on screen here so that we can see the cover, because I think it's time to get your pre-order in. Steve.
Absolutely. The book is available for pre-order. And if I could briefly just first say something about the Carbon Project, since I started to talk about it. If anybody has an interest in learning more about it, or we're in the early stages, we've done a lot of groundwork already. So if anybody does want to reach out to me about that, feel free to do so. You can reach me at steve@bionic-planet.com. That's steve@bionic-planet.com. It's a great project, and it's going to change the lives of about 2 million kids. Anyway, going back to the book, this is a fictionalized account of the creation of a carbon project, multiple carbon projects, and the genesis for this. You see that Renat Heuberger has a bigger name on there than I do, or than Marco Hirschbrunner. That's because the story really is his. And this is a subject that you and I have talked about quite a lot: is the need to communicate uncertainty. I think one of the reasons carbon projects and carbon finance has failed to really scale is because it has a lot of uncertainty in it, and the uncertainty has been poorly communicated. There's no more uncertainty than immunology or the field of medicine or anything else, but it's been poorly represented. And I've written on this extensively, and I was talking to Renat Heuberger, the former CEO of South Pole, about at the Dubai climate talks, and we were both just going on about how this stuff is never going to take off if a critical mass of people don't understand how this stuff works, that it's about probabilities, not certainties. What is additionality? What is a PDD? Questions that I'm asked all the time on here. And how do you take this really complicated subject, which really is no more complicated than a lot of other stuff? It's just, it's just a small, and make it understandable. And Renat came to me in the middle of last year, and I'd written a lot of articles on this, and he was like, hey, you know what I've been doing? I've been breaking down every one of these uncertainties into a paradox, an individual paradox. And that, the additionality paradox, the baselines paradox, the communities paradox, the fact that every community is very diverse, and, on and on and on. The transparency paradox, the fact that this is very transparent, and transparency is actually used against it instead of in favor of it. And I'm like, well, that's really cool. That's great. I thought that was brilliant that he broke them down into paradoxes, because each one is a digestible chunk. Then he wrote a story around it, and he comes to me with this thing that he wrote about 3 young students who are kind of naive, and they decide to get involved in the creation of a carbon project. And they're from a fictional country, and they're from one fictional country going to another fictional country. At the time, I was in the middle of a book of my own, which is a real story about the real history of carbon finance, and the Suri project that I mentioned. Renat's like, man, once you start going into a real project, it just gets so complicated. He just fictionalized it, and he wrote these 3 kids. They get involved. It opens with they see this woman, this young girl a video of a girl drowning in a developing country. One of the kids in this is from the developing country. They decide they have to help. They realize philanthropy hasn't worked. Government intervention hasn't worked. Let's try this carbon market stuff. They get involved in it, and from the minute they get into it, they're like, Jesus, this stuff is goofy. It doesn't make sense. Oh, it does make sense. What do we do? And it really is a fun story. I mean, when I saw what he had done, I immediately quit what I was working on, and I was like, hey, Renat, can I really want to help. I want to become a part of this. And so I was fortunate enough to be kind of brought in and helped to develop the story. And we've spent the last year kicking it back and forth, working it, putting it through the ringer between me, myself, and Renat. Now it's being published by Red Penguin. It will be available on September 21st. So it will launch during New York Climate Week. And we are looking for as many pre-orders as we can, because the more pre-orders we get, the day it drops, when it finally goes live, if we have a couple thousand sold, then suddenly we're getting promoted all over the place. It's priced very reasonably, like $14.99, I think, for the hard copy, and $9.99 for Kindle. And if anybody has an interest in if somebody is in the sector and thinks, hey, I might want to review it to provide a blurb or something, we have a version that I can share. Obviously, can't be shared further, but we can make it available for people to see in its current state before it goes through final editing. All I can say is everybody we've shown it to gets excited. People have told us that they've never thought they would actually cry while reading a book on carbon finance, and they do. And we do solve. I mean, the thing about these paradoxes is a lot of them cannot be solved. A lot of what just like it's like in medicine, we're never going to have a perfect solution to anything. They can't all be solved, but some can. Some have to be accepted, and some just have to be explained away. And we do have a solution. We do resolve this in the end. We propose what we think is our way forward in all of this, which is a blend of what we should be getting, which is a blend of governments doing what they're best at, drawing the lines, markets, financial sector doing what it's best at, finding the solutions, and the civil society just engaging with people. So I think I'm hoping people like it, and I hope people pick it up. Please check it out on Amazon, and if you want to have a review copy, reach out to me. And if you're a well-known person, if you're Christina Figueres or Al Gore or anybody just who would give us a blurb, then reach out to me, and I will we can share a link so where you can read the book and help us out.
I've no doubt Al Gore watches us all the time on IPO-VID, Steve. So thank you for that. We'll hopefully be hearing from him in due course. That's going to be great. So good luck with the Carbon Paradox on September the 21st. I'm looking forward to reading it myself. It should be absolutely fabulous. We are really, really interested in that project, and good luck with that altogether. And I suppose, therefore, just coming back to digital finance to ask kind of one final question on that. I suppose one issue that arises is, how do we make sure that digitized systems don't just become another black box and replacing one kind of opacity with another?
Well, so far that's just not happening. I'll still push back on this idea that it was opacity. I think it was complexity, and I think because I do think carbon markets, especially compared to philanthropy and government aid, was always more transparent. But with the new digitized methodologies, anything that isn't designated as being confidential, there's always going to be something that's sensitive to the way the business works. There's going to be stuff you can't, farmers don't want their finances all over the place. But with the new digitized methodologies, everything will be available online, and available to buyers at the very least, and possibly to everybody. And there is, I do have a fear, if you read the book, we have what we call the transparency paradox, which is based on something true that happened, where in carbon projects that made themselves extremely transparent were the ones that got attacked, because suddenly everything that didn't work was as easy to see as everything that did. And none of these we're not promising paradise on earth. We're promising an improvement over what currently exists. But I think that's, I guess, the answer. Tell me if it sounds like a cop-out. It's just that you just make sure that everything that can be available is available. You make sure that with the project I'm working on, we're going to be making sure that we document everything. Every every meeting, all the minutes, anything, unless somebody says something is off the record, it's going to be available to people so they can see where does the church stand, where do the teachers stand, who agrees with it, who disagrees with it. It's just it'll be very easy to see.
Fabulous. Transparency in action. It's going to be absolutely marvelous. Well, now, Steve, we've asked you this question before, and I have a sort of hint of masculine intuition as to what the answer might be today, but I'm nonetheless going to ask it once again. Steve Zwick, where do you think the capital market revolution goes next?
Well, I'm actually going to argue that we've talked about it today. I think right now, especially in terms of carbon markets, it's going towards digitization. It's going to go very, very quickly, and then that's going to lead to integration of carbon into other corporate supply chain activities and corporate valuations. I think we're on the brink of a new era in transparency of environmental impacts. And I know people have heard that before, but I'm worried people have digitization fatigue. I know I did, because you get tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. But one thing I didn't mention that might be important. One reason it's taken so long to get these digitized methodologies is that it's like a chain, and it's only as good as the slowest chain. And if you have bottlenecks like we have had, you can digitize 90% of it, and nothing's going to work. Nothing will matter if everything's got to stack up at that one point. And I think as those bottlenecks disappear, we'll see this accelerating.
Fabulous. I think that's a very good note to end on for today. Thank you very, very much, Steve Zwick, for being here to discuss digitizing carbon. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, get out there now and order on Amazon The Carbon Paradox by Renat Hauberger, Steve Zwick, and Marco Hirschbrunner. That looks like a gripping read that'll be out on September the 21st. That's slightly after we'll be back. This is our final show for this season. We're going to take now schools out for summer, so therefore with your FPEG free prior informed consent, we'd like to have a few weeks off to try and recover and come back in the fall with some exciting new content and many, many more guests, which we're really, really looking for. Messy times, Christmas season. The last final innovation is here. Dollar BTC was a good proof of concept. Dollar SBVSV was an improvement, but Bitcoin 3.0 Gajamuru is here. Well, there's an exciting topic for you to consider on your beach lounger during the course of the summer holidays. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for that, Chris Messina. I want to say a huge word of thanks to all of our commenters today. Great questions all. Thank you, Theo B. Thank you, Alex Holliman. Thank you very, very much, Anne Berg, regular on this show. Great to hear from you. Really, really appreciate all the comments you've made today. Thank you also. Lots of great production being today from Janella, Natalie, and Racy. My name is Patrick L. Young. I look forward to that article on gcintel.com. Don't forget that's QC, I do apologize. QCintel.com coming soon from Steve Zwick. My name is Patrick L. Young. If you're looking for any marketplaces, or other constructors being built, then get in touch. If you're bored and missing us, don't forget you can catch up on all of the past live streams on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget, of course, Exchange Invest will be there in your inboxes every day if you'd care to subscribe and learn all about the bourse business, carbon markets included. My name is Patrick L. Young. Thank you once again, Steve Zwick, for that fantastic show today. Leaves us beautifully at the point of the summer break. Thank you also, let me say a couple of nice words. Eric Cassina, well done, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much for that, Eric. Thumbs up from Marcus Ward. Lovely to hear from you, Marcus. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to all those of you who love this show. My name is Patrick L. Young. Thanks again to the production team and Steve Zwick. And we wish you all a wonderful summer holidays. We'll be back at the start of September with IPO-VID episode. Oh, I don't believe that's going to be 183. Have a great week. Have a great summer in life and markets, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back in September. Have a good one.